Today we are interviewing Frank G. Houdek, who is Professor of Law and Associate Dean for Academic Affairs at Southern Illinois University School of Law in Carbondale, Illinois. Frank was the director of SIU's Law Library from 1985 until 2007, when he was appointed Associate Dean. He also served as the school's interim dean during the 2009-2010 academic year. Frank, let's begin with a little personal history. Can you tell us where you were raised and about your family and life, both when you were young and today?
I'll be happy to, and I want to begin by saying what a great experience this is, a chance to sit and talk with you today, Pat, about myself, but more importantly about law librarianship and ALL. I was born and raised in Southern California. I'm a true California native. There aren't that many of those around, but I am. My mother also was a California native. My father was born in Kansas. He came to Southern California when he was 6 years old. He had asthma, and they thought that would help things out. It didn't, but I'm happy that he arrived. So I grew up, for the most part, in Los Angeles. I grew up, in fact, in the shadow of Dodger Stadium in Chavez Ravine. My backyard was Elysian Park, where the Dodger Stadium was located. I have one sibling, a brother, who's a year younger than me, and he, in fact, still lives in Los Angeles, in Echo Park, and, in fact, in the same house that we grew up in. So that's kind of fun for me to go back there now and visit him there. I have 4 children. They range in ages from 26 to 41. They are spread out. They're all on the Midwest or on the east side of the country, so that makes it convenient for me. I'm married to Susan Toulis, who is a former law librarian and who is an associate dean here at Southern Illinois University, so that kind of brings us up to speed. I've been, as you said, in Southern Illinois since 1985, but I wanted to be on the record that I remain a Dodgers fan and a Lakers fan, and I will continue to think of myself in some ways as a Californian.
Sounds like you have all the right priorities, Frank.
I think so.
Could you talk a little bit about your education and professional training? What degrees do you hold, and where did you go to school?
Absolutely. Again, I'm from Southern California, and at the time when I was choosing where I might go to school, UCLA was an option that many of us in Los Angeles sought after. And as it turns out, I earned all 3 of the degrees that I have at UCLA. So I basically graduated from high school and went to UCLA for 9 years, which meant I still lived in the Echo Park area for most of the time, so it was a lot of driving back and forth in my car, knew the route, and I didn't really have to think about it. I earned my bachelor's degree in psychology in 1971. I earned a JD from the UCLA School of Law in 74, and a graduate library degree from their UCLA's library school in 1976. In 74, after I graduated, I took the California bar and passed that bar, but even at that point I had already begun to think about moving into the profession of law librarianship, and that's why I pursued the library degree at UCLA.
Let's move now to your career in law librarianship. How did you decide to become a law librarian? Did someone recruit you into the profession, or were you attracted to it through some other reason?
My story is in some ways similar to many I've heard from other folks who are in the profession, but maybe a little bit different. I was, as I said, at UCLA School of Law, and I would say about in the middle of my tenure there, about sometime in my 2nd year, I kind of made the decision that I wanted to seek an alternative career. Now, it's interesting, I thought about that over time. I suspect that if I were going to law school today, I might not have made that decision, and only because when I was going to law school, you really were not exposed to much about the actual practice of law. You took basic doctrinal courses. There was not very much in the way of practice experience. So my idea of what a lawyer was what I had learned about from watching television and movies, and that was being at trial. And that was not something that I felt like I wanted, that I was interested in. So I thought, geez, that maybe I need to look for something else. At the time, I spoke with Fred Smith, who was the director of the UCLA Law Library, and just kind of sounding him out. And I think I did that, he did not reach out to me, he didn't really know me. UCLA was a large school. But I had been somewhat interested in libraries. I'd always been a library user. I read voraciously, as did my parents. Spent lots of time in libraries. So I thought, well, you seem to like libraries. Maybe you can do something with this. So I spoke with Fred. He was very positive about the profession. Even at that time, in the early 70s, it still was not, the dual degree librarian existed, but it wasn't necessarily the prominent so much. But he assured me that there was, in fact, a viable profession for someone who had a library and law degree. So that was step one. Step two was, and again I was fortunate being where I was, there was a graduate library school right there on campus. I just had to walk across a couple of fields and quads, and there I was at Powell Library and went and talked to the folks there. And again, they were positive and expressed some things that I thought made this a feasible option for me. But I was at least smart enough, at least in retrospect, I think it was smart. While I was in law school, I actually took a graduate library course. The law school allowed me to get law school credit for taking a 3-credit course in reference. Took that course. I wanted to see, well, okay, in the abstract it sounds like a good idea, but in reality, is this really something that would work? I enjoyed the course very much. It was a relatively small course, 10 or 12 students. The faculty member teaching the course referred to me as his lawyer, and whenever there was a question about legal information, he would turn to me. But the reality was most of what we were talking about was not legal information. It was other kinds of information and other kinds of sources and tools, and I just found it fascinating. I took one other step before I really took the big step, and that was, I said, well, that's fine, but maybe you should actually work in a library before you make this career shift. So I was able to get a job at the Los Angeles City Library, in the main public library in downtown Los Angeles, and worked there in the science department. I was basically a shelver. A few years later, there was a big fire in that library, and I understood completely why that occurred, because the bulk of the collection were in closed stacks that went from the basement up to about 10 stories up, and all piled together. It was a miracle that it had not occurred earlier. Nevertheless, I enjoyed that experience, and I was convinced this is something I wanted to do. I then entered the UCLA Library School, and then the biggest stroke of luck I ever had in my career, and I've had quite a few strokes of luck, but this was the biggest. UCLA was a 2-year program for that degree. They had an internship at the Los Angeles County Law Library, which at the time was the 3rd largest law library in the country, behind Harvard and the Law Library of Congress. And they allowed me to do that during my first year. So basically, I was taking coursework at UCLA, and then I would come back downtown and work at the LA County Law Library for as much as 30 hours a week, which was much more than the ordinary internship was. I worked in all the departments in the library, had a great experience. They had a fabulous staff there. And I knew this was the right thing for me after that experience. Again, I say what a stroke of luck, because in the spring of 1975, I'd completed the first year of library school. But the LA County Law Library offered me a position as reference librarian, the understanding I would then go on and finish my degree, which I did while working full-time there at the county law library. So I basically entered the profession of law librarianship in about June of 1975, just as ALL was holding its annual meeting in Los Angeles. And in today's world, that would have meant I went to the annual meeting. In that world, it meant that I stayed home at the county law library, manning the reference desk while everyone else went to the meeting. Nevertheless, it was a great start for me.
That all sounds very interesting and fascinating, frankly. You also served in a variety of positions and in different types of libraries over your career as a law librarian. These include being a reference librarian, as you've mentioned, in Los Angeles at the County Law Library. You've worked in a private law firm in Los Angeles and Associate Law Library Director at the University of Southern California. After that, you moved here to Carbondale and served at Southern Illinois, where you were the Law Library Director from 1985 until you were appointed Associate Dean in 2007. This is a broad base of experience. What led to such a varied career, and would you advise a new librarian to follow a similar path?
I have had a varied career, and it's been one that has been extremely interesting for me, and I'm very glad that I followed the path that I did. I'd like to be able to say that I plotted it out all from the beginning and it all fell into place. That would not be exactly true. I will say, and I actually wrote an article about career development within the first year or two after I came to Southern Illinois and kind of reflected on that early experience. So I suppose if what I say in the next few minutes is not helpful to a new law librarian, they might want to go look up that article and read there. I was probably a little more articulate then. But I was a reference librarian at the LA County Law Library for 4 years. As I said, a great experience. I basically worked at the reference desk from 8:30 to 5, Monday through Friday. And I was answering questions all that time. It was that busy. And so I was exposed to everything you could possibly need to learn about being a reference librarian. But as time passed, I concluded that I wasn't learning anything more. I was not getting the opportunity to do other things that librarians do, and I had visions of myself by then, at that point, for a more expansive career. So I took really somewhat of a risk, I think, by moving from the county law library, which is a very secure position. Most people that work there their entire careers. They retired, they were well paid, they had great benefits, they retired with a very good pension. And frankly, when I began, that's kind of what I envisioned would happen to me. But as I say, over time, I decided that really wasn't what I wanted. So I applied for a position at a medium-sized law firm in Los Angeles. The firm had been around for quite a while. And I basically had to talk them in to hiring someone who had both degrees. That was not the usual pattern at that time, and they had not had librarians with dual degrees. But I convinced them, they hired me, and I had a great 3-year experience there. And I specifically chose that opportunity because it allowed me, relatively early in my career, to be the librarian, to run a library, to make the decisions, to do the planning, to do the acquisitions and catalog work, things that I never would have had the chance to do, to work with the budget. As a reference librarian at LA County, I was one of 10 librarians, 10 reference librarians. And they didn't ask us about the budget. That was not part of the need, so I wasn't learning anything about that. At the law firm, I was the person who was responsible for it. And of course, in a law firm setting, there is a bottom line, and you have to really pay attention to that. So a great learning experience for me. And I probably conceivably could have continued on with that because I enjoyed it very much. It was challenging and exciting, and yes, there were deadlines, but there were all things that were manageable. That said, however, I had an opportunity come to me from the University of Southern California. Albert Brecht, who at the time was the director of the law library, and I knew Albert fairly well from our activities together with the Southern California Association of Law Libraries. Alan Houdek, another very important member of our profession, had recently left his position as an associate director at USC to become the director at Ohio State, and used this opportunity to say that Alan was a dear friend and he was a tremendous law librarian. It was a real loss to our profession when he died very young. But in any case, Albert actually sought me out and said, why don't you apply for our associate director position? And I really had not thought too much about moving into the academic world, although, of course, I had attended university and other programs for 9 years, so I was very familiar with the academic world. But the more I talked to Albert, the more interesting the opportunities seemed to present themselves, and so I said, yeah, I think I will take a chance. The law firm, to their credit, were very sad to see me go, and they even offered me an increase in pay to stay. But by that point, I had decided that it wasn't money that I was interested in. It was this other opportunity to try a different kind of library and to allow myself to move in some different directions, teaching and scholarship. Those were things that were not really available in the law firm setting. So, and they did interest me. So I moved to USC. I had a great experience there, just like LA County, and frankly, just like my experience at Lawler, Felix & Hall, the law firm. Very good staff. I learned so much from Albert. I got to rejoin one of my colleagues from UCLA Library School, Tori Trotta, who was then the head of technical services at USC, and she and I had been library school classmates. So that was a lot of fun. Several other people there as well at USC that I learned from a great deal, but also just enjoyed having as colleagues. And I was very content, and I was there at USC for 2.5 years. I had some opportunities to think about directorships at other places, but I really felt like I was not ready for that. And then Southern Illinois University came calling. That was a school I was aware of because they had two directors. It was a relatively new school, began in 1973. The founding law library director was Roger Jacobs, another, fabulous librarian and shining light in our profession. He had founded the library and set a tremendous foundation for it. And then when he left to go to the Supreme Court of the United States Library, he was followed by Elizabeth Kelly, who also was someone who I had worked with by then through AALL committee work. And so I knew her and knew she was a very solid librarian. She was moving to Penn to become their director. Liz had followed Roger and had built a new building. So basically the situation I saw at SIU was a library with a great collection established by Roger, with a great building built by Liz, with a very solid staff. I thought this is a perfect place to begin my career as a academic law library director. So in December of 1984, I packed up my family. We moved to Southern Illinois. It was about the third time I had been in the Midwest. It was the winter, but it was shirt sleeve weather when we arrived. Within a week, it had snowed, and there was snow on the ground for the next 6 weeks, which was quite an experience for a Southern California native to figure out how to manage that. But I did. And that's kind of where I came. I expected quite quite candidly, I say this to everybody, I expected to be here for 2 or 3 years or 4 years perhaps and move on to somewhere else. Turned out that this was the perfect place for me, and I've never regretted that decision. As far as what I might say about a varied career and whether other folks should follow a similar path, I think I was greatly benefited by learning that yes, there are some things that are different about different kinds of libraries, but for the most part, it's the similarities are many more than the dissimilarities. I think it's a great opportunity, and quite honestly, as I hope it reflects from what I've said up to now, I wasn't exactly sure what I would like. When I finally tried out the academic setting, that turned out to be what I really liked. That was the perfect fit for me. If I had not tried that, I would not have known, or perhaps if I hadn't tried the private libraries, I would have been thinking, oh, the grass is greener over there, maybe I should try that. So for me, it was definitely the right thing to do.
Frank, you have contributed greatly to the development of Law Library scholarship, not only through your own writing, but especially by your service as editor of the Law Library Journal, in which you served from 1995 until 2007. You also served as editor of Perspectives, Teaching Legal Research and Writing from 1992 until 2000, and as a member of its editorial board from 1992 until 2007. Could you tell us a little bit about those experiences?
Those are some of the most important and satisfying experiences of my professional career. I served as ALL president. I've held a number of other offices and chaired committees and the like, and all of them have been important experiences and ones that I enjoyed. But my service as editor both of Perspectives and Law Library Journal, I think, were the most personally satisfying to me. I felt like I made important and tangible contributions to our profession through that service. Interestingly enough, I actually began with what was the predecessor to Perspectives, a publication called Integrated Legal Research, and I was on the editorial board there, and that was when that publication was actually sponsored by what was then known as Mead Data Central. And today we refer to them as LexisNexis. I served on that editorial board, and then it morphed into the publication Perspectives, Teaching Legal Research and Writing. And Steve Barkin was the editor for the first 2 years of Perspectives, and then he decided he could not continue doing that, and the board asked me whether I would be willing to serve in that position. And I said, yeah, I think I would. And I feel that that was a new publication. It was still developing. There were still opportunities to decide what we were going to do with that when I came on board as editor. And that was very exciting for me, both to be making the decisions that would create what I think has turned out to be a very substantial and important publication for those who are involved in teaching, research, and writing, and an important publication venue. In addition to that, I got to work with and know many individuals as authors who I would not have otherwise known. And I also worked with a close relationship with the editorial board, and again, that included some people that I knew well and who I enjoyed working with, and others who I didn't initially know well but got to know. So that was a great experience. My more somehow or other, as you say, I began editing that in 1992, and then along comes 1994. Dick Danner, another stalwart member of our profession. He edited Law Library Journal for 10 years, did a fabulous job. I wrote an article when I became editor saying these are not shoes that anyone really wants to try to step into, but for some reason I did. I applied for the position and was chosen editor, and so for several years I continued to edit both Perspectives and Law Library Journal at the same time. They're totally different kinds of publications. The articles are shorter for Perspectives and so forth, but again, I tried to bring something to Law Library Journal that was unique, and obviously, again, a hard act to follow with Dick, but I had my own ideas about what I thought would be important to be in the journal. I edited it for 13 years. I used to be able to tell you to the page exactly how many pages I edited. It was about over 10,000 pages. I've never been better informed about legal information, about law libraries, about law librarianship, about librarianship generally, than during that period. It's just a fabulous experience. I mean, first of all the articles that you're publishing, you're actually reading, and my guess is that most people are like I was before I became editor, and I hate to say it, but somewhat like I have been since I left the position of editor, which is the issue comes in, you glance at the table of contents, you say, oh, those articles look interesting, and if you're lucky, you read one or two of the articles. Well, when you're editor, you read every single article 3 or 4 or 5 times, plus you read all the other manuscripts that come in that don't get published. So just a great experience for me in doing that. Again, met some great authors, and I guess, again, I just would want to reiterate, for me, I felt like being the editor was allowing me to make a very substantial contribution to our profession, creating a permanent archive of important information that would be available for a long time for law librarians.
One of the advantages that I have had, being retired now for the last few years, is that when the journal comes, I can actually read the articles, and I have thoroughly enjoyed that. And I've often sent private messages to some of the authors about when I've been particularly impressed with something, and the feedback. I mean, it's wonderful. While I was active, as you've already sort of alluded to, there are too many other priorities for our time to sometimes do as much.
Yeah, and it's a shame, isn't it? Because the quality of the writing and the thinking in Law Library Journal is first rate. It really is, and it's a shame when pieces go unread. And I want to congratulate you on taking the time both to read those pieces, but also then to reach out to the authors. I know they appreciate that very much.
Well, it's been a labor of love, to be perfectly frank.
Well, that's great. I think that's wonderful.
Thinking a little more generally about law library scholarship, what impact do you think it has had on the profession? And are there any works or authors which particularly influenced you?
I think that the law library scholarship has had a substantial impact on the profession, and one of the ways I measure that is by looking at if you look at the early years of Law Library Journal, it was a trade magazine. It was, how do you do this? How do you do that? There's absolutely nothing wrong with those kind of pieces. We all need to know that. That's important information. But gradually, over time, it evolved, and I give a lot of credit in particular to Dick Danner for this. And again, I was following his lead during my years as editor to go beyond how do I do it, what's new in this library and that library, and to get pieces that are thoughtful and thought-provoking about issues related to legal information, law, the profession as a whole, in related subjects. So I think especially since I would say the 1970s, in the 1980s and beyond, and I would congratulate the current editor, Janet Cinder. I think she's maintained this as well. There have been pieces that have made a difference. I'll cite one example more generally, and then I'll cite a personal example. The one example I would cite more generally is are the pieces that Dick Danner published, written by Bob Baring and Chris and Jill Wren, a debate, if you will, about the teaching of legal research and the importance of legal bibliography. Those pieces were really groundbreaking in the sense that they presented issues that were out there that needed to be addressed and discussed and thought about, but really hadn't been articulated. And those pieces caught the attention of readers. You know, it may be true that most of us are too busy to read most of the articles in Law Library Journal, but I dare say that those articles were read by a very large audience. Another general example, I've already lied, I'm going to tell you two general examples. The other example that comes to mind is an article that the late Don Dunn, another dear friend, another law librarian who made great contributions and left us too early, wrote an article. If I'm trying to get the title right, it was something along the lines of Why Johnny Can't Research. So it was sort of a takeoff on Why Johnny Can't Read. He again brought our attention to the importance of teaching research and teaching in an effective way. Don also wrote an article about the importance of law library scholarship. I commend that to any law librarian to understand that even if it is not a requirement of your job, to be a member of the profession, it's an important aspect of being a professional law librarian. So he wrote that. The other piece that I wanted to talk about that particularly influenced me was an article by Christine Brock. This was written in 1974, and I had to look up the title to make sure I got it correct, so I do have this one right. It's called Law Libraries and Librarians, A Revisionist History, or More Than You Ever Wanted to Know. And what Christine Brock did in that article, a fairly lengthy piece in Law Library Journal, was to trace back to the history of law libraries and law librarians. And for me, that just resonated. It was revelatory, really, that there was actually, that you could do scholarship, that you could think about the history of this profession. It wasn't just, here's what I'm going to do today, here's my job today, but rather, there is a history to this. There are people that mattered, that made choices that formed our profession, and it's important to know about them, important to know about the decisions they made, and also to think about, were all the decisions correct? Are there other things, other ways that we could have gone and that perhaps we still can go? For me, that kind of opened up a whole area for me to explore during my profession, and especially with my own scholarship.
That comment or that response somewhat focuses on what I want to ask next. Speaking of writing and scholarship, many of your own books and articles have chronicled the history of ALL and its members over the association's first century. Can you tell us a little bit about those works, and in particular, how and why this subject became important to you?
I can. In the early 1980s, I was appointed to what was then referred to as the Publications Committee of ALL. And I was a relatively newer member. I guess that would have been in about 7 years into the profession. And one of the an opportunity arose through that committee to develop some information that could be presented to new members that could tell them a little bit about the association. And for the most part, it was, well, what are the officers? How is the board formed? what are special interest sections, what are chapters. So it was more just kind of familiarizing them with the association itself. But as part of that publication, which eventually was published in about a 50-page pamphlet called Introducing the American Association of Law Libraries. It came out in 1983 and then subsequently in 1986 and was distributed to every new member. Anyone who joined got a copy of this. But what I did for that publication was to create what I call the AALL chronology. And I went back and I read through issues of Law Library Journal and other sources and developed this kind of year-by-year chronology of the association and its development from its founding in 1906 down to, at that point, the present, the early 1980s. And I had gotten that interest, I have to say. I minored in history at UCLA, my undergraduate degree. I've always been interested in history. I think that probably came from my father, who was also kind of a amateur history buff. Very eclectic, as I am. If it interests me, then I read it. I'm not necessarily a Civil War buff or a Revolutionary War buff or whatever. It's just if it interests me, I read it. So I had that bent. And then going back to my time at the LA County Law Library, Earl Borgeson, who I consider my mentor in the profession, really the person who made me realize that you don't have to look at your job as just a job. You can actually have a professional career. So he was the one. As a result of him, I shifted from the idea of I'm going to work at the LA County for 30 years and retire with my pension, but rather to I'm going to develop and have a profession and a career. We talked a lot about history. Earl had been a former president of the association. He had known a lot of the movers and shakers. He was a student of Marion Gallagher. In fact, I believe, and Pat, you might know this, he was maybe the second student, first or second student.
I think he was second. I think Viola Bird
I think you're
was
right.
a little ahead
I
of
think
him.
Viola Bird was number one, and he was number two out of Marion's program. And in fact, my very first annual meeting, which was in Boston, I took the red eye from LA to Boston. I walked into the hotel. Earl just happened to be there. He grabbed me by the arm and says, "You have to meet someone," and he introduced me to Marion Gallagher. So the very first person I met at an annual meeting was Marion Gallagher. So he put a bee in my bonnet about AAL history and its importance. And probably, for me, I don't claim to be a historian. I have a minor in history. I took some classes because they interest me. What fascinates me about history are stories, and especially the personal stories. So a lot of what I have done is try to capture that. So for instance, when I was editor of Law Library Journal, I did several articles. One was Meet My Mentor. So I had people write about who their mentors were. Another was my first annual meeting. I had people write about their experience at their first annual meeting. Another was A Day in the Life. So I had people write about what they did on a daily basis in the early 1990s. And those just resonate with me. I just find them fascinating. And fortunately, there's enough other people who seem to find them interesting as well that I've managed to make a sort of a quasi professional scholarship career out of doing this. I also, I should say very quickly that I then went on and produced something called the ALL reference book, which in some ways is outdated in today's electronic world. A lot of this information is much more easily accessible. When I created that book in 1989, I think was the first edition when it came out. Information about who had been the secretary of ALL in 1935, that was very difficult to find. when did, how did the chapters, when were they established? Who were the founding fathers of each one of the chapters, and all those sorts of things. So I compiled all that information, put it into a book, and it's still in print. I still do an annual supplement for it. It's now available electronically through Hein Online as well, but I continue to do it. I also took that chronology, that AL chronology that I first did for that little pamphlet, and I expanded on it for in 2005, or pardon me, 2006, as we were approaching the centennial of ALL. It was produced in electronic form, made available through AllNet, and then I took all that, added footnotes, added more information, and published a book that was, wrote a book that was published in 2008 called The First Century, 100 Years of ALL History. So I've kind of covered the gamut so far, although I'm still very, very much interested in it, which is one of the reasons I'm so pleased to be participating in this interview with you today.
Frank, you have truly contributed a great deal to law librarianship and to legal education through your voluntary professional service. In addition to your 13-year stint as Law Library Journal editor, you have already mentioned that you were president of the association in 1996 and 1997. You served as president also of the Southern California chapter of the association. You were the founding chair of the AL Council of Chapter Presidents, chair and secretary of the Mid-America Law Library Consortium, and chair of the Council of Law Library Consortia. You have also been active in the Association of American Law Schools, serving as chair of its Law Library Committee, and the American Bar Association's section on legal education and admission to the bar, serving currently as its Data Policy Committee, or on its Data Policy Committee. Your service has been recognized in a variety of very appropriate ways. You have the Frederick Charles Hicks Award for distinguished contributions to academic law librarianship, and you have and hold the association's highest honor, the Marion Gould Gallagher Distinguished Service Award. And you are also a member of AALL's Hall of Fame. With this background, I wonder if you have any thoughts to share with newer law librarians, or more seasoned ones, about professional service. In particular, do you think that they should serve the profession, strive to serve the profession by assuming leadership roles in AALL and other associations?
Before I address that question, I want to say two things. One is that I was very humbled to receive first the Hicks Award from the Academic Law Library Special Interest Section, which I was fortunate to chair in the late 1980s, and then the Marion Gould Gallagher Distinguished Service Award and the Hall of Fame. Those were very special honors and recognition for me, and I appreciated them very much. I knew, however, that all of that was made possible by the people that supported me, certainly my work colleagues. I mentioned editing Law Library Journal and Perspectives at the same time. Those were full-time jobs. I was still the director at SIU, which meant there were people at SIU that were doing a lot of work that probably I should have been doing as well. And that the same holds true for the folks who worked with me in my other positions. So without them, none of those awards would have come. But it is very, very nice to be recognized by your professional colleagues, and again, all the committees that I served on, the chapters I chaired, presided over, and all those things, that executive board that I worked with when I was president. And I can't let this opportunity go without saying that, Pat, you preceded me as president of ALL, and I could not think of a better mentor to follow in that position. I learned so much from you, watching the calm, deliberate way you oversaw the association during your year as president, and I tremendously benefited by that. And then also I was fortunate, as you were as well, to work with Roger Parent as the executive director of ALL, and he just did a fabulous job. He built on the foundation that had been established by the preceding executive directors, and then took it up 3, 4, 5 notches. So I know that someday Roger's an honorary member of the association, still follows it, and I hope that he will be joining me in the Hall of Fame. I shouldn't say me, joining both of us in AL's Hall of Fame soon. As to what I might say to newer or to more seasoned law librarians about participating in the association, in the profession, by assuming leadership roles, it's a hard decision to make in today's world. Almost all of us are asked to do more with less resources, and frequently less resources not only means smaller budgets, but less personnel. So to say, yeah, sure, I think everyone should use up some of their valuable time by volunteering. I understand that that's calling on people to make sacrifices. That said, I think being a member of a profession, as opposed, going back to what I said earlier, as opposed to having a job, one of the differences is that you give back to that profession. You strive to help it move forward. You strive to improve it. And we need leaders to do that. And we cannot rely on the old guard. The old guard gets tired. The old guard eventually is the older guard and is gone. And we need new leaders. And we need people. I mean, I was fortunate. By the time I served as president, I had presided. I was president of a chapter. I had chaired an SIS. I had chaired several committees. I had done a variety of things that prepared me to take on that role. And I just don't think that you can take on these important leadership roles without that kind of preparation. So I think it is important to volunteer, and not volunteer just to be a member, but to volunteer to help out in more significant ways. The other thing I would say, and this for me is a much more personal thing, but my professional career was so enriched by my professional involvement. I enjoyed every one of my jobs. Continue to enjoy my work as Associate Dean for Academic Affairs here at SIU. But if that was all I was doing, it would not be enough. I would not have the range of professional colleagues and, frankly, very, very close personal friends that I do without my professional involvement. So on a selfish basis, I would say if you don't, you are missing a fabulous opportunity. This is a great profession. To my mind, it's just the right size. It's large enough to actually make a difference, but it's small enough where you can personally make a difference, not just the profession making a difference, but you personally, you can have an impact. You can move into positions which will allow you to do things which you will find to be satisfying and fulfilling, and frankly will be of benefit to your organization as well. Sometimes that requires some convincing. You have to make your case, but I think that case can be made. So, believe it or not, but my suggestion would be you're missing out if you don't take advantage of those opportunities.
Well, thank you, Frank. I think on that we should probably conclude the interview. I want to thank you especially for taking these few moments to talk with us. But before we actually end, is there anything that comes to mind that you would like to mention at this time?
I suspect I've probably said everything that's worth saying, but again, I'd reiterate that I'm so pleased to be involved in this oral history project. I think it's something that fits in so perfectly with my interest in AL history and probably on the larger scale, my interest in the stories, in people's stories. And so I'm happy to make my small contribution today.
Well, thank you, and I don't find any of what you just said immediately a moment ago at all surprising, because I have read all of your pieces I think you've done of legal history nature, and so this is a nice sort of addition to that repertoire as we develop it over the next few years.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.